All right, welcome to the Synchronicity Show. It is your host, Kevin Wathey, and today on the podcast, I have Mr. George Lizos, who is a spiritual teacher and intuitive healer. He is passionate about helping lightworkers follow their purpose of creating positive change in the world. He's the #1 best-selling author of Lightworkers Gotta Work and Be the Guru. He is also the creator of Intuition Mastery School and the host of the Lit Up Lightworker Podcast. You can find him and everything at George Lizos, Lizos.com. Mr. George Lizos, my man, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Kevin, thank you so much for having me. I'm doing wonderful and I'm so excited for this chat.
I am as well, and thank you. You're joining us all the way from Cyprus, so I know it is evening for you, morning for me, but I am looking forward to diving on in. And really the first place I want to start, and I've been doing this as of recently just to kind of see if we can start on a fresh foot, and I want to know, like, what is the biggest thing for you right now that is lighting you up? Pun 100% intended there.
Okay, the #1 thing that's lighting me up is singing right now. And I have a little story here because I think it opens this conversation around life purpose, because I've written my book, Lightworkers Gotta Work, to provide a step-by-step guide to help people find their life purpose. And I'm really specific about defining it in a specific way. And then eventually I realized that sometimes when we spend so much time niching down on who we are and what we do, sometimes we may forget other aspects of ourselves that still need to be honored, still need to be nurtured. So whereas it's important to find our purpose and really follow it, it's also important to not forget and start acknowledging those other aspects of us that may not be like our specific mission in this world, but they definitely support it. And for me, that was performing, that was singing, that was musical theater. I had done this my entire life. And then eventually when I realized my purpose was to be a spiritual teacher, I paused on that. And then I completely dedicated myself to building up my spiritual business. And over the past 2 years, I've just felt this yearning, this need to perform again, to be on stage, to sing. And as soon as I started doing that a little bit more, it just completely lit me up, and it infused my work with so much more passion, with so much more energy.
I love that. And I love that you bring it back around, because that's something that light workers, spiritual teachers, people in that kind of any healing modality really always speak about. They always say, hey, make sure you're trusting your gut, following your intuition, listening to what it is that your heart is yearning for. And that was something that you personally had almost removed, or you did remove, and now you're trying to come back to it, come back to yourself. So how does it feel to... You're almost taking a spoonful of your own medicine for a second right there. How does that allow you to actually then now give to your clients and the people that you're helping in a bigger and better way?
You know what? We live in this world that constantly encourages us to define ourselves, to brand ourselves, to be something specific, to be recognizable. And with social media, with Instagram, with Facebook, with Twitter, it's all visual. And therefore you have to show up consistently, similar colors, similar tone of voice, like share the same kind of energy. And when you do that all the time, and I'm sure you feel that as well as a public person, as a public persona, that you show a part of yourself, the part of yourself that people expect from you, but sometimes you lose yourself in that persona. That's what I felt as well, at least, that I lost myself in that persona of what I put out there. And I realized, you know what, there are more aspects of me that I'm not sharing with my audience. And you know how I found that out? I asked a question in my Instagram stories: what Hogwarts house do you think I am? And everybody said, 90% said Hufflepuff. I am the least Hufflepuff person I know, but That's the Hufflepuff side of me that I share on social media. In truth, I'm a Slytherin, the exact opposite. So that's when I started realizing, you know what? Maybe all these guidance, all these patriarchal guidance about rigidity and structure and defining yourself in a specific way isn't all there is. And integration and embracing our multi-passionate selves is the future. And I genuinely believe that whereas it's important to niche down, to specify, to find a life purpose and follow it, it's also important to acknowledge that we're more than just one single color. We're a whole rainbow of colors.
I agree with you 1000%. And I want to kind of disagree with you on one aspect of it a little bit there. And that's, I don't think it's the future. I think it's where we're going, yes, but I think it's something that we've always had part of us. So it's like, it's not necessarily something that we need to add in. It's something that we've lost in an essence, that we've almost conditioned ourselves to think of one side over the other. And I had another guest on the podcast a while back who gave a really good analogy of like the human existence. And he said, think of yourself as a trampoline. Each spring of the trampoline is a piece of you as a person. And all of that is what holds the trampoline sheath itself onto the frame. If you put a bowling ball on the trampoline, what happens? It rolls around. You're more so of this person at one time or this person at another. But what are you? You're always the sum of all the parts. You're always the whole. You're not one spring. And if you think about yourself as one spring, you're then negating all of these other parts of yourself that allow yourself to truly like find your authentic self and live who you want to become.
I love that analogy. It's basically what you said. It's about remembering more of who we are and allowing all that to come into the surface naturally rather than suppress it, which a lot of the history of patriarchy has been about suppressing our feminine energy, our wild, unstructured, unapologetic energy. 100%.
And I love that. And so I want to talk and kind of steer the conversation towards like you uncovering this path and you turning not only this path that is your passion, but turning this into a business for yourself as well. So like, talk to me, like, how did you initially first uncover that this is what you wanted to do with your life?
Yes, it's an interesting and a long story, but I'm going to cut it short. So essentially, it starts when I was 15 years old, growing up in Cyprus, which is a small island in the Mediterranean. And when it comes to small communities and minorities in general, they tend to be very judgmental. They tend to expect too much from you. They expect it to be a certain way. So growing up as a child, I always had this need, because I was not your usual kind of child. I was the kind of person that instead of going to parties and playing with friends out in the park, I would just be out in nature, look up at the sky and wonder, why am I here? What is the purpose of life? I was one of those weird kids. So as a result of being different, I found myself constantly trying to fit into other people's expectations of me, trying to be the good son for my parents, the perfect student at school, the perfect citizen in society. So as a result of creating this sense of having to change myself for other people's expectations, I started changing who I was born to be. So by the time of 13 years old, actually, that's when I realized that I was gay, and I could not accept that. I was in a Christian society, in a Christian family. Gay people at the time in Cyprus were considered to be pedophiles and criminals. There was a huge stigma on homosexuality, and it wasn't another label that I was willing to take on. I already had all the other labels that people put onto me, the weird one, the shy one, the one who likes this, the one who likes that. So I wouldn't take on yet another label. So I'm like, you know what? I've been doing this my entire life. I'm just going to change myself from gay to straight, one step at a time. And that's when my spiritual path began. That's where I entered the two most debilitating years of my life, from 13 to 15 years old, every day, trying to change who I was, monitoring the way I walked, the way I talked, the way I expressed myself, my thoughts, trying to make me not be gay. And at 15 years old, when I realized I couldn't change who I was born to be, I told myself, you know what, you're a human abomination. You're not going to make it into the world. So you might as well put an end to it. So on a very dark night, that's how I have it in my mind, I wrote a letter to my parents, I took a bunch of pills, and I was ready to just put an end to it. And it was in that lowest moment of my life, right before I did it, like right before I popped those pills, that I had an epiphany that was the start of my spiritual journey. And that epiphany was, fuck what people say, fuck what society thinks, fuck the church, and just learn to love and accept yourself exactly as you are. And I had no idea how to love myself. I had no idea how to even begin the process of forgiving myself and others. But you know how it works. When you show up for you, the universe shows up for you. So because I was willing to change, all the right tools and processes started coming into my life. It started with Feng Shui, and then reading about positive affirmations, and then discovering and working with angels, and just going from spiritual modality after the other, learning to love myself, learning to forgive my bullies, realizing that I was my biggest bully, and then starting the journey to healing, my path. Eventually that led to me writing my book, Be the Guru, which launched my business. And here we are 16 years later.
I love that. And thank you for sharing openly and vulnerably of that as well. And I want to, before we get into talking about the book and your business, I want to talk about a little bit about that 13 to 15-year-old range. And now reflecting back, because it sounds like, and I know you have done a lot of work on yourself and working through and becoming the person that you were meant to be. How come, and maybe you don't have an answer for this, but if you do, how come at 13 you didn't just choose to be who you were meant to be from then? What was it that was holding you back or conditioning you to think that you had to be a different way? Was it that small community that you were in?
Yes, it was societal expectation, parental expectation. It was religion. It was rigid structures. It can, and this is something that I feel is very universal. Like, even if you don't live in a small island, you live in constraints within the world, within society, whether it's a school system, whether it's a church environment or religion, whether it's your family. We all live in little prisons that have been imprinted on us by external forces. I define those external forces as the patriarchy, which is a system of life that has been going on for thousands and thousands of years, essentially try to dictate how we're supposed to live life. So as a result of all these external experiences and structures, and my own desire to satisfy them and be perfect, like it also comes from temperament and psychology and individuality, because I had a predisposition of wanting to be good, wanting to do good, because my purpose, as I found out later, is to help people become better and to help create change in the world. So because of my temperament and my life purpose, with those rigid structures and expectations, it was a bad combination. And I think it's very easy for anyone who is in society with this outside influence and indoctrination to shift towards the side of constantly trying to satisfy others rather than looking within and realizing that we have the inner map that will allow us to find the love, the fulfillment, and the success that we so need. We come with it, but we eventually forget it, as you said, and we have to remember it.
What is the best way, in your opinion, to go about remembering that you have that map, or uncovering that you have that map already within you?
I'm all about the practical tools. So in my experience, I had to reach that low point for me to have a realization. But we don't need to have a low point in order to be able to find who we are and find our life purpose. I reverse engineered what happened that night. And I'm like, why did I have an epiphany in that moment? What were the factors that led me to have that epiphany? And those factors were surrendering. In that moment, I had surrendered the resistance. I was no longer trying to be perfect. I was no longer trying to live up to other people's expectations. I was just free because I made the decision to put an end to it. We can reach that level of surrender without wanting to take our own lives. And a practice that I use is meditation. That's the number one practice that I recommend, that I suggest to people, because when we meditate, and people are scared of the word meditation, but it's a very easy practice. It's basically quieting your mind, because your mind is constantly thinking and creating emotions, and these emotions are creating neurosis sometimes, fear, anxiety. So when we take a step back, stop thinking, it's not easy to stop thinking, but we can think less, or we can think more general thoughts. We can think something happy. We can think something like the breathing of ourselves, or the ticking of the clock, or just the breeze if we're out in nature. When we just focus on something small and insignificant, that gives our mind a break. We relax a little bit, and then when we stop thinking, what do we feel? If a thought creates an emotion, what emotion will come up if we think less, or if we don't think at all? And that's our original emotion, which is the emotion of happiness, of purity, of empowerment, of love. It's the emotion we felt when we were born, because when we look at little children, they reflect back to us our authentic nature, our authentic purity, which is why we always smile. So we were born as innocent, pure, connected little babies. And when we meditate, we give ourselves a taste of that. We remember more of that.
I love that you say that too, because I feel like for a lot of people, meditation is almost confused as things that it's not. And it's thought of as things that it's not. And it's like, I know I've spoken to people who are like, yeah, meditation is just shutting off your mind, right? And I'm like, you can't shut off your mind. You're human. It's physically impossible until you're dead. And so I basically, the way that I've broken it down is meditation as a whole, for anyone that's listening that maybe doesn't know, it's just a single point of focus. That's you controlling where your focus is going. And by controlling where your focus is going, you're then able to dictate the expanse that your mind experiences. That is where you can then quiet the mind, because you're able to focus on one thing rather than jumping from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 and all over the place. In additional piece there, that's something really interesting that I read about recently, is that our minds, and everyone thinks that we can multitask. But the truth is that it's actually physically impossible for humans to, attentionally speaking, multitask. And when your mind switches from, say, point A to point B, there's a thing called an intentional blink, which is anywhere from 1 to 3 seconds of where your mind takes what they were thinking of and then shifts to what it was thinking of next. Now, if you're doing this once or twice, great, it's all fine. But if this is something that's prolonged, or you're doing it day in and day out, now that compounds upon itself. And now there's all of this gray area, for lack of a better term, that then makes you feel pulled in all these different directions, because you're not actually then present with one specific thing, which is then what meditation is working to help you be able to choose what you're thinking of and also be in control of your own thoughts.
Multitasking is exhausting, 100%. And I mean, think about the world we live in right now. We don't just have the physical world around us. We have social media that just amplifies having to be social and having to be pulled in so many different directions, like times 10. So because of these quickly changing world and all this business that there is around us, it becomes harder and harder to be able to, as you said, focus our mind and direct our attention and our energy to something very specific, which is exactly what meditation is. It helps you get back that focus, get control of your presence, get control of your intentionality, and being able to direct it into something specific. And that specificity, when it's directed inwards, helps you get in touch with who you really are, helps you get in touch with the purity, with the love, with the joy, with the connectedness, the intuition that you already have access to, but you've forgotten because you're just pulled in so many different directions.
So let's talk about that single point of focus and shifting your intentionality, so to speak, in regards to building a business around what it is that you were passionate about. Because I know there are a lot of people who feel this calling to give back, to help, to serve in a bigger way, but they don't know how to necessarily structure it in a business sense. Because a lot of people know how to do a job, but not necessarily create a job and be a business owner in their own right. So when you first stepped into this role of building a business around helping others in the spiritual path and being a light worker, how did you structure this? Or what were the first steps that you took in building out that business?
Perfect. I love talking about this. So essentially, a light worker, the way I define a light worker is anyone who wants to help make the world a better place. So Lightworkers usually tend to have this sense of urgency from a very young age that, you know what, time is running out and I've been sent here for a mission and I want to use this mission to help create change in the world. So this is the definition of a lightworker. So how do we begin finding what that mission is? And as you said, structuring it. And I went back to my own journey and I reverse engineered my own process to come up with a process that I teach in Lightworkers Gotta Work. So the first step, we need to have clarity as to exactly what we're here to do. What is my life purpose? That's the number one question I'm being asked. And it's not so hard to find because I've found a correlation between joy, happiness, love. They are all in the same vibrational frequency. Correlation between happiness and our life purpose. So here's the logic behind that. When we're born into the world, we've just come out of source. Okay. And when we look at little babies, they are happy. They are joyful. They're aligned. So if source, God, the universe, whatever you want to call it, is all knowing and therefore source knows our life purpose. And as soon as we come out of source as babies, we're happy. That means happiness, source, and our life purpose are all kind of connected. And therefore, when we return back to that purity, that happiness that we had as babies, as children, then we can more easily remember what our life purpose is because we're instantly connected to the vibration of our inner being and therefore source. So we're extensions of source, essentially, physical extensions of source. And when we remember that and align ourselves energetically and emotionally with that, we're able to find clues of our life purpose. So in the book, I guide people through a process of identifying areas, times in their lives where they have been and experienced this sense of happiness. And by the way, happiness is not pleasure because pleasure comes from external circumstances. It's ephemeral, like when we have chocolate. But happiness and joy is just something that we just are. It's something we remember. People say, oh, happiness is within you. And I'm like, no, happiness is not within you. Happiness is you. Happiness that is within you is pleasure. Happiness that is you, that's just who you really are. So when we start looking and asking ourselves, what did I enjoy as a child? What were my interests? What did I want to be when I grow up? Or when was the happiest time of my life? Or when is the happiest time of my day? Then we start realizing that we've been following our life purpose throughout our lives whenever we've been doing something that helped us remind ourselves of that happiness. We just haven't consciously linked all those breadcrumbs together to realize they've all been leading us to our life purpose. The reason Joseph Campbell wrote a book and he said, follow your bliss. That's the best piece of advice ever, because when you follow your bliss, when you follow what lights you up, as Rebecca Campbell said in her book, Light is a New Black, when you follow what lights you up, you light up the world. So how do we find our life purpose? We find out what makes us happy, but not pleasure happy, just pure happiness. And we do more of that. And that leads us to defining our life purpose. And in the book, I help people really write it down in a specific step-by-step, a specific definition, mentioning why am I here? What am I here to do? How am I here to do it? Who am I here to serve? These are all the questions. These are business coaching questions that we can bring and merge with spirituality so we can come up with something that's tangible. With spiritual people in general and light workers, I have sometimes they're afraid of the word business. They're afraid of marketing. They're afraid of niching down and just defining themselves. I ask people, okay, what's your life purpose? Oh, I want to help people heal. I want to help make the world a better place. I'm like, duh. That is our collective light worker purpose. We're all in this together. But how specifically are you here to do this? Who are you here to serve? People. Well, is it men? Is it women? What ages? How are you going to make it? Well, by teaching them, like using what modalities, like how are you going to do that? Like, why are you doing this? What specifically are you? I'm going to help them heal. Heal what? So it's all about asking ourselves these questions. That's what I had to do back then. Now, thankfully, I had this business mindset. I went to business school and I got a degree. So I was like trained to think like that. But I think more and more people need to start merging the two, because you know what? The world needs more awakened, conscious entrepreneurs to launch businesses that help create change rather than distract and take us backwards.
When you think about the entrepreneurial journey, and I agree with you that we need more impact-focused entrepreneurs, I would probably term it, rather than income-focused individuals. And when you actually break down business, income is a result of the impact that you're providing anyway. So you have the wrong inputs that you're focusing on, so to speak. So when you work with these individuals who are just starting out in their entrepreneurial journey, how, after asking them the questions, how do you then get them to structure what the next steps of what they need to take or what they need to do actually are?
So the number one step, after you know your life purpose and you've defined your business, like this is what I'm here to do, I want to help people create this change, then it's just a matter of talking with those people and finding out how they feel, what they want, and matching their wants and their desires with what you have to offer. Essentially, market research. I see so many spiritual, impact-focused entrepreneurs just launching courses because they feel people will like them and benefit from them, or because they benefited from them. But unless you ask and talk with the people around you, with the people who you want to serve, and they tell you exactly what they want, you cannot validate that idea. So it's all about validating your impact-focused idea. Before I launched anything, before I wrote my 2 books, before I launched Intuition Mastery School, I took an entire year to launch my online course because I wanted to ensure that people will like it. So what I did is I did polls in my Instagram. I did polls within my Facebook group. I asked questions, and then I arranged interviews with people and I talked to them and I just listened. Because when we want to help, sometimes we just talk a lot and we don't just listen to what the audience has to say. So it's very important to learn, take a step back, ask the questions, and let people speak. How do you feel? Why do you want to get there? What keeps you up at night? What prevents you from changing? What changes do you want to make? Why can you not make them? And then you start realizing what that gap in the market is, what people want, and then you simply have to provide that. Of course, in the meantime, your own limiting beliefs and fears come up. There is self-sabotage. Ooh, who are you to do this? Imposter syndrome. Or you're not good enough. Let's do another course. Let's do another training. That was mine. So it's a dance between doing the inner work, doing the spiritual work within yourself, but at the same time, taking action, learning from your audience, and then providing what they need.
I'm glad that you brought up the limiting beliefs, because that is a huge aspect for people who, I mean, even successful entrepreneurs and people who have been around the block for a long time. It's the limiting beliefs that hold us back from whatever it is that we want to do every step of the way. Like business, if you want to break it down, I'd say is 80% mindset and then probably 20% systems. And then those systems also dictate your mindset too. So it's basically all mindset anyways. So with those limiting beliefs, do you have any actionable tips or things that you specifically do in order to work through them or overcome the either conditioned or self-inflicted limiting beliefs that people impose upon themselves?
Absolutely. So limiting beliefs, first of all, come to the surface with our triggers. So our triggers lead us to our limiting beliefs. What is a trigger? Is any negative emotion that you feel in response to something external. So you see a post of someone on Instagram and you're like, you feel something within you, you get triggered by it. And then when you interview that trigger, you get to find there is a belief behind that. And when you interview and be inquisitive about that belief, you find out there's another belief behind that. So when you go deeper and deeper into your limiting beliefs, you tend to find your core beliefs, your core limiting beliefs. So limiting beliefs are multi-layered, and therefore there are sub-beliefs belonging to other beliefs, and therefore you have to go to the root cause. At the same time, I see them as buckets with memories and experiences. So here's what I mean. I think of a limiting belief as a bucket that's filled with different memories or identity imprints. These are all experiences that happen at some point in our lives that created or strengthened or amplified that limiting belief. So practical tools. Let's say, for example, you have the belief of, who am I to do this? Okay. You can ask yourself, when was the first time that I remember feeling this or thinking this. And that's going to take you back to a series of memories where you believe that something happened that caused you to think that. That's an identity imprint. That's an outdated identity imprint. You defined yourself as someone who thinks that way at some point in your past, and that got stored in your body because the body keeps the score. The mind may forget, the body never forgets. Then you can ask yourself, when was the first time that I remember someone else thinking that? Because we also model other people. We model our parents. We model the people we see in our world, and we take on those beliefs that they had. And at the same time, to find the root, the core belief underneath those limiting beliefs, you can ask yourself the 5 whys. Why do I believe that? You're going to get an answer. Why do I believe that? You're going to get another answer. Why do I believe that? When you do this 5 times, chances are you're going to find the root cause. So you keep asking why, essentially, until there's nothing more coming up. And you'll end up finding like the basic core limiting belief that you need to work on to let go of. And there are so many different mental transmutation techniques we can use, both energetically, spiritually, but also cognitively. We can use tapping, but the one I use currently, we can use journaling or like CBT if you want to go down the therapy path. But the technique I use is called integral eye movement therapy, whereas you move your eyes while thinking of specific memories, and that updates your identity and desensitizes traumatic or negative experiences. So there are so many different techniques, but the simplest one, journaling about them, like arguing with yourself. Why do I believe that? Who told you that? And just like having a conversation with yourself in written form, on the mirror, so many different ways.
I love that. No, and it's interesting you bring up the 5 steps to why, because with all of my courses myself, every single course starts out with the 7 steps to why worksheet. So it's actually the exact same process. We just go 2 steps. I don't know if it's really 2 steps deeper then, but it is a 7-step process that gets you to the same route. Is really where you want to then start, and then where you want to create from, because that's what actually paves the way and sets you up for success from day one. So Take me through the writing of your book, because I know there are quite a few listeners who that is something that they want to do eventually, is write their own book. And I would say start now rather than eventually. But what would be your best either tips, tricks, frameworks that you would recommend someone do in order to either write a book or to write an online course if there is overlap between the two?
I love this question because I'm actually a book mentor as well. I mentor people in writing their own books. Now, I have experience in book publishing. I'm just going to share a little bit about that, and then I'm going to share my perspective just to see where I'm coming from. So before I launched my business, actually while I was launching my business, I worked for Hay House. You may be familiar with Hay House, the publisher. So I worked for Hay House Publishers in London. So I got the experience of traditional publishing. Then I self-published my first book. Then I mentored other clients and authors in a hybrid publishing environment where the author pays and then the publisher takes care of things. So I have experience of publishing from both self-publishing, traditional publishing, and hybrid publishing. Now, my number one piece of advice that I've learned in my publishing journey, and when it comes to like writing books, is many people, especially in the spiritual wellness community, they want to write about their own story. And I have some tough love for that. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about your story. Unless you're Beyonce, nobody cares. So, I mean, it sounds insensitive, but it's not. Now, it doesn't mean that your story shouldn't be in the book, but it shouldn't be the focus. So before you write a book, I believe we all have a book inside of us, but before we write the book, we need to switch our attention from ourselves, from self-indulging, to our audience. Again, it's all about doing the market research. Asking people, what do you want? What are you missing? What's preventing you from moving forward? Then when you have that main idea, you can share your story in the first 2 chapters max and eventually include a little like stories and anecdotes throughout, but don't make the entire book about that unless it's an autobiography and you're a famous person, or a memoir that's really like you have a dramatic story that will captivate the audience, then fair enough. For example, there's a great book, Dying to Be Me by Anita Moorjani. She died and came back and healed herself from cancer. Of course, she would write about her story in the entire book because people want to know about that. But if your story is not as dramatic, then you want to focus it on the audience. So you come up with the idea, and then it's just a matter of coming up firstly with the steps for each part of the book. Essentially, you ask yourself the question, what does my ideal customer or reader avatar needs to get from point A to point Z? They need to go through point A first, then to point B, then C, etc. So you have a clear idea of the idea, your ideal reader, the single person that this book will help, and then you make everything about them. How can I help them get from point 1 to point 2? And that's how you come up with the parts. Part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4. Then you go to each part and you just go deeper. Okay, in this part, what is the aim of this part, and define it in a single line. In this part, you will get to do this and this. In the second part, you will get to do this and this. So you have a clear definition. And then what are the steps that will allow my reader to get through all of that and achieve that goal? So you constantly need to have your ideal reader in mind, and you need to be asking yourself the question, how do I take them from point A to B in the easiest and fastest way? Because the number one piece of advice I got about writing a book is nobody wants to read your shit. That's the title of a book. It's called Nobody Wants to Read Your Shit. And I'm like, you know what? Nobody wants to read another book. People don't buy books because they want to read books. People buy books because they want solutions to problems. So you should write exactly what people need and not more, but not less. People only buy anything because of the benefit they're going to receive from it. And that's back to what you talked on there. That's like the spoonful of tough love right there, because no one really does give a shit about anything that you have to say or do. And to think that they do is very much an egoic belief pattern or a thought in terms of that the whole world revolves around you. When the actuality is, if you take a look at yourself, what are you getting from someone else? That's kind of the way that every single person approaches everything that they do. But because you now know that, you can use that to your advantage and really then capitalize on that, because you can say, look, this is what this ideal avatar, this dream client wants. Now we can focus on that, and then we can write for that based on your own experience solving that problem. Now you're taking your experience, but then solving the problem in the way that makes sense for the benefit of that individual. Yes, it's a hero's journey. We have a hero that means a guide, and the guide guides them through all the problems. They overcome those problems and they eventually reach the destination. What the author needs to realize is that we're not the hero anymore. We've been the hero. We've found the solutions. Now we've taken the role of the guide. So in the book, we are the guide taking the hero that is our reader through this journey. Many people make the mistake of thinking of themselves as still being the hero while writing their books, and that just messes things up. Let's take that one step deeper now too, because the hero actually has two journeys. If you subscribe to the Michael Haig kind of belief to storytelling and copywriting, and there's the external as well as the internal story. So the external is what people can see. This is like you hiking the mountain. But no one really gives a shit about that. That's just what they can see. They actually care about the internal transformation, which is then the person that person became while hiking the mountain. And if you can then write and kind of touch on the emotional aspect of the person, and look at any really good book, any film, anything that is noteworthy in that sense, you're going to see there's the external and there's the internal. And the reason that me and you and anyone else connect with a character is because we connect with the internal piece of them, not the external one. Yes, and let's take that one step even further with the artist's journey. So the artist's journey is what happens to the hero after they complete their journey. Do they stick to that journey for their entire life and just milk it and milk it and milk it? Or do they search for new journeys? Do they push themselves out of their comfort zone? And how do we take that formula, that journey that we had, and we recreate a new one or keep evolving in life by writing new books and expanding. I love this conversation. I love how we've taken this and kept expanding it.
I love this as well. And I'm curious, what has been, and I want to switch gears for a second here, but because we're talking about all of these things that have been accomplished, I want to talk about and switch it and flip it on its head real quick. What would you say is the biggest mistake in business that you've ever made? And what did you then learn from that?
Yes, my biggest mistake was when I was first starting out. I created a bunch of online courses because I enjoyed the idea of them. I thought people would benefit from it, but without doing the market research. I learned the hard way and I almost completely gave it up. I remember clearly just completely breaking down and telling myself, you know what, enough. I've tried, I've created so many things. It's not working out for me. I'm just going to let it go and just become a boring accountant and just do this for my entire life. And when you have this passion to serve, it won't let you stop. It won't let you give up on yourself. That's what I realized. So I kept it's very masochistic sometimes because you keep on failing and then you realize, you know what, I still want to do it because I still want to serve. So the lesson here for me was this word that I just said, serve. Because I was self-serving with those courses. I'm like, what do I enjoy teaching? But then as soon as I shifted that to how can I serve, and therefore coming back, shifting from my spiritual ego of here I am this spiritual person who wants to serve, and realize, okay, how can I really serve? And let me chat to people. Let me hear what they have to say. That's when it all shifted for me. And I'm just realizing this consciously while I'm talking to you right now, is how I made that shift of serving myself, spiritual ego, with serving others with no ego and using ego as a tool.
Well, you're shifting from the feature to the benefit. You're shifting from yourself and the focus on the self to that of actually listening, responding, and then from that place creating. Rather than creating in a place that's self-serving, you're creating in a place that's, hey, tell me where you are coming to me from. Now let me create for you from that place.
There you go. 100%. Yes.
I love that. George, I also think that might be a fantastic maybe bookend to chapter 1, pun intended here too, of this episode. And I would love to have you on again in the future because I love where this conversation has gone. And I feel like there are quite a few different avenues and tangents that we can go down in the future. The way I want to wrap up though is I have a couple rapid fire questions for you, if that's okay with you.
Let's do that.
All right. The first one is if you could attribute your success to one thing, what would it be?
My adversity, because it helped me grow and it helped me. I didn't need it, but it did help me learn and deepen who I am.
I love that. It's true. It's the difficult times that allow us to grow. And if you're going back, here's a tangent now. Going back to what you were talking about before, the search of pleasure or in search of fulfillment kind of discussion, there are two different kind of approaches to living, the hedonic way and the eudaimonic way. The hedonic way is in search of like gluttony, where everything that you do is pleasure-based, but the eudaimonic way is in search of everything that you do is for a fulfilling purpose. And then the rest of it comes. Because if you focus on solely pleasure, it's actually not exactly what you want at all. It's the lack of fulfillment and lack of growth because you don't have the adversity that you can then overcome and then become who you were meant to be. Like you don't need the rock bottom, but I will say the people that I have seen that have accomplished the most have also been through the most shit.
Yes, 100%.
Question number 2 is if you could spend 1 hour with someone alive or dead, who would it be and why?
Oh my God. The first person that came to mind, I'm just going to go with it. It's Marilyn Monroe. Now, I've always admired her. I thought there was something deeper that she couldn't express, she couldn't share. And because I'm studying psychology right now and I'm just like really interested in looking into other people's personality, I'm very interested in her psyche, in her personality and who she was, how she became who she was, and how that sadly did not end up in a good place. So I guess it's my problem-solving qualities of wanting to like psychoanalyze and just see what's happening there and how I could have helped her, I guess.
It'd be absolutely fascinating to kind of peel back the layers of the onion there, so to speak.
Yeah.
The last but not least, the final question here is, in your opinion, what is the single most important thing someone can do to live a happy, healthy, and fulfilling life?
Know the difference between happiness and pleasure and do what make them happy. Trusting that when you show up for you, the universe will show up for you as well. And trusting that by following those breadcrumbs of happiness, you'll be led to living a happy life, because there cannot be a happy ending to an unhappy journey. That's my favorite quote from Abraham Hicks. When the journey is unhappy, the ending will be unhappy as well.
I love that so much. George, thank you for your time today. Is there anything else you'd like to add or say before we wrap up for the day?
That's all. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. And it was such a joy chatting to you.
It was an absolute pleasure. George, thank you. Everything that we talked about today will be linked in the show notes at kevinwathey.com/podcast. You can also get to George's book and all the other resources that we spoke about today. So thank you all for all of those of you who are listening, and have an absolutely amazing rest of your day. Hey, it's Kevin here. And before I let you go, I wanted to let you know that the complete show notes for this episode, as well as any other, can be found at kevinwathey.com/podcast. And if you enjoyed the show, please consider leaving us a short review on Apple Podcasts. I love reading the reviews, and they're often the tipping point in helping us book some very hard to reach guests. Now, if you want to or would like to receive a weekly email from me called the Weekly Mindful Memo, head over to kevinwathey.com/VIP to subscribe. By signing up, you'll receive exclusive behind-the-scenes access and be the first to know about upcoming episodes, retreats, and more direct to your inbox. Again, you can sign up to receive the Weekly Mindful Memo by going to kevinwathey.com/VIP. Thank you for listening. Much love, and have a wonderful rest of your day.